Hey everyone! If you've ever felt like English grammar is just this giant maze of frustrating rules and bizarre exceptions, or if you're currently gearing up to conquer the IELTS exam, you are in the exact right place. Today, we're opening up the definitive mastery playbook in this explainer. Together, we're going to transform those confusing, headache-inducing exceptions into recognizable, empowering patterns that you can actually use with total confidence. So, why does English grammar often feel like a collection of weird exceptions? Honestly, it's a completely valid struggle. You learn a rule, you think you've got it down, and then almost immediately you find three different cases where it just doesn't apply. It's incredibly frustrating. But here's the secret. What look like random exceptions are very often just deeper patterns waiting to be understood. By the time we wrap up today, we're going to completely rewire how you see these rules. Here's our agenda for today's explainer. First, expressing preferences like a pro. Second, the verb pattern puzzle. Third, mastering comparative adjectives. Fourth, decoding IELTS reading tasks. And finally, number 5, winning with vocabulary collocations. Let's dive into Section 1, expressing preferences like a pro, where we'll be ditching the guesswork with prefer, and would rather. All right, let's break down our first two options. We use prefer for describing a general truth or a habit. You use it with an ing form, like I prefer walking to work, or you can use it to compare two things directly, like I prefer tea to coffee. Since it's a general truth, you don't use it in a continuous form. You wouldn't ever say, I am preferring. On the flip side, would prefer is used for a highly specific situation rather than a habit, and it takes a to infinitive. For instance, I'd prefer to leave now. It sounds a bit more formal, a bit more polite, and it's absolutely perfect for pointing out what you want in one particular moment. Now watch out for this one, because it is a super common pitfall. When prefer has an object, like the word him, the whole sentence structure shifts. The correct way to say it is, I prefer him to do it. The incorrect way, which trips up so many learners, is I prefer him doing it. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that when prefer has an object, it always requires a to infinitive. It never takes a gerund. Okay, but what if your preference is about someone else's action entirely? Like saying, I'd rather you called first. This introduces our third option, would rather. Now, usually would rather takes a bare infinitive, which is just an infinitive without the word to, like I'd rather stay in tonight. But things get a little bit mysterious when the preference involves someone else. And this brings us to a really fascinating concept called the unreal past. This is a grammatical pattern where a past simple verb is used to express a desire about the present or the future. Kind of a mind bender, right? So in that sentence we just heard, I'd rather you called first, the word called is technically a past simple verb, but you aren't actually talking about the past. You mean you want the person to call first right now, or maybe later. This unreal past pattern is literally everywhere in spoken English. Moving right along to Section 2, the verb pattern puzzle, where we'll be decoding infinitives and gerunds. We have to acknowledge a tough truth here. There is absolutely no single, simple rule that predicts which pattern a verb takes. Because these verbs are unpredictable, they just have to be categorized. Some verbs strictly take the to infinitive. Think of verbs like decide, manage, want, and offer, as in, she managed to pass her test. Other verbs demand the gerund, or that ing form, enjoy, avoid, consider, suggest. Think of an athlete. He avoids eating fast food before a match. And then there's a third, slightly trickier group that takes an object plus a to infinitive, like the word want. My parents want me to finish university. This last group causes major errors for speakers of languages that try to use a subordinate clause with the word that instead. You really have to stick to these exact patterns. Look, I'll be totally straight with you. There is no magic shortcut here. Your absolute best path to true fluency is to actively notice and record new examples exactly as you read or hear them. Jot them down in context instead of trying to memorize some non-existent predictive rule. All right, Section 3, mastering comparative adjectives. Let's fix some of those really common sizing errors. Making adjectives comparative in English is actually based on a really straightforward rule about the length of the word. Short adjectives, usually just one syllable, take an ER at the end, like easier. Longer adjectives with 3 or more syllables use more before the adjective, like more comfortable. But here is a huge mistake we need to debunk right now. You can never combine both comparative strategies at once. you only get one comparative marker per adjective. It's either the ER ending, making it easier, or the word more in front. Never both. More easier is always 100% incorrect. We do, of course, have a few irregulars that simply have to be memorized. Good and well become better, and bad becomes worse. But there is a strict golden rule you must remember. Use comparatives for exactly two things. If you're looking at two candidates, you say, he is the more reliable one, not the most reliable one. Superlatives, using the most, are strictly reserved for when you are comparing 3 or more items. And this brings us to the absolutely vital importance of parallel structure. In the sentence, renting a flat is more expensive than buying one, both renting and buying are gerunds. They balance each other out perfectly. If you say renting a flat is more expensive than to buy, you completely break that parallel structure. The big takeaway here is that both sides of your comparison just have to be balanced using the exact same grammatical form. Now that we've sharpened up our grammatical foundations, it's time for Section 4, decoding IELTS reading tasks, specifically mastering true, false, and not given. I want to give this concept the gravity it really deserves. Not given means a statement is simply not addressed at all in the passage, period. Even if it sounds entirely plausible, this right here is where so many test takers lose marks. They fall into the trap of assuming that a very reasonable sounding statement simply must be either inherently true or inherently false. But you have to locate the exact part of the passage, and if the text is silent on the claim, the answer is not given. Never rely on your general impressions or just a couple of keywords. When it comes to IELTS sentence completion, there are 4 essential rules you need to survive. First, skimming for keywords just isn't going to cut it, because the question wording will almost always be completely different from the original text. Second, you really must understand the meaning of the surrounding sentence. Third, always check the word limits. If it says no more than 2 words, stick to it. And fourth, ensure the word you plug in makes the completed sentence grammatically correct. The answers do come straight from the text, but you need deep contextual understanding to plug them in accurately. Finally, Section 5, winning with vocabulary collocations. This is all about tackling vocabulary in context. We need to talk about how English words naturally combine into fixed units, rather than just functioning as isolated dictionary definitions. Phrases like strike a balance, torn between, or rest with someone are fixed collocations. You literally cannot piece these together word by word. You just have to recognize them as whole, natural units. Think of them like Lego blocks that are already stuck together. The English language heavily relies on these fixed chunks, and vocabulary in context tasks on tests are specifically designed to see if you know them as complete phrases. So, how do we actually conquer them under pressure? Here is your 3-step attack plan. Step 1. Read the full sentence. Step 2. Predict the missing word or the fixed phrase it belongs to before you even let yourself look down at the answers. Step 3. Check your options. Following this structured workflow prevents the incredibly common mistake of just testing each vocabulary option in isolation, which honestly almost always leads to second-guessing yourself. So, now equipped with these strategies, how will you strike a balance between knowing the rules and understanding the context on test day? You have the playbook now. You know exactly how to maneuver those tricky preferences, crack the verb patterns, balance your comparatives, and tackle those IELTS reading traps head-on. I'm challenging you to take these structured hacks and apply them to your very next English practice session or your upcoming exam. You've totally got this. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will see you next time.